This week's Parsha is Parsha Shelach, and I want to skip toward the end of the Sidra, toward the end of the reading, where the Torah describes different kinds of sacrifices. There is the sacrifice which can be given as a gift, or in fulfillment of a vow, and it goes into the specifics of what that is. And then we have the mitzvah of taking challah, taking a portion, the first portion of our dough, and giving that to the Kohen, giving it to the priest. But here's the one that really jumped out at me. And actually the text, part of the text of this reading is included in our Yom Kippur service. If you shall make a mistake and not observe any of these mitzvot that that God commanded you, that God spoke to Moshe. And then it goes on to speak about if somebody, if the leader of the congregation shall make a mistake, then there's a special sacrifice for the leader of the congregation. V'nislach l'chol adat b'nei Yisrael v'lager hagar b'tocham ki l'chol ha'am bishkaga. And all the congregation of the children of Israel shall be forgiven, and the stranger that lives among them. For in respect of all the people, it was done in error. This is chapter 15, verse 26, page 632.
Thank you.
36?
32.
Chapter 15, verse 26, page 632. So and then he goes on to say, if one person shall sin accidentally, and this is the korban that they shall bring. Why should we have to be forgiven for mistakes? It wasn't our fault. It is indeed, when it says ki l'chol ha'am bishkaga, he's saying that, everyone makes mistakes. It's something that is even, why should a person be held accountable for something that they clearly didn't do wrong? And I came across a passage in the Talmud which seems to shed some light on this. The Talmud there says, if a person finds themselves, this is on a Brachot, Talmud Brachot, page 5, I think. The Talmud says, if a person finds themselves to be suffering, they should examine their deeds and see if there's any behavior that they're engaging in that they need to correct. That this painful experience, this suffering that they're going through, would be a wake-up call to that suffering, to that sin, or to that bad behavior practice. Then, what happens if a person examines their deeds and doesn't find that they've done anything wrong? So he says, well, you can assume that it's from not studying enough Torah. By the way, someone said, if you examine your deeds and you don't find anything wrong, that's probably because you're not learning enough. If you would learn more, you would have a better sense of how you could improve. In any case, when we then the Talmud goes on to say, if a person doesn't, if a person examines their deeds and doesn't find anything wrong, and also is not, it has determined that they are studying the most of Torah that they're able to study. So what is it then? Why do people suffer in a world that is run by God? If God controls the world, why should people suffer? And so the Talmud says, Biyadua, if that's the case, you should know that Eluhein Yisurin Shel Ahava. This is suffering which is given to us as a sign of God's love, rather than out of criticism. And I wondered about this suffering of love. And various commentaries try to understand what is the suffering of love. What is suffering that's a sign of God's love? Rashi comments there saying that the suffering is not to cleanse a person of a sin per se, rather it is to increase their reward in the world to come. And so through having had less enjoyment in this earth, through having had pain in this earth, a person increases their reward in the world to come. So I wondered about this. Why would you say that? Why would you say that a person gains in the world to come by suffering in this world, and yet it isn't because of anything they've done wrong, right? If it isn't because of anything I've done wrong, then I should be getting the maximum. I should be getting the maximum reward in the world to come anyways, meaning what's holding me back from getting more reward in the world to come that suffering cures, if it isn't not being good enough, right? And not being good enough is a sin. So one commentary says that this is because of accidental sins. So a person can't rightly be punished because of accidental sins, but they do prevent a person, having sinned accidentally prevents a person from being able to experience the divine presence, being able to experience the full spiritual enlightenment or the full spiritual fulfillment of paradise, of Gan Eden, of heaven. And that too seems kind of unfair. Are you saying that God kind of wants to punish us, but can't, or something like that? We really deserve to, and one commentary in fact says this, that really we deserve to be punished, but it's just not sustainable for us to be held accountable for these minor sins, and therefore sometimes arbitrary suffering, what seems to be arbitrary suffering, comes because of the way this I don't even know what to call it, because of this sinfulness of the world which hasn't been dealt with. And Maharal says something similar, but which to me shed light and kind of tied everything together, and this is what I wanted to share. He says a person engages in, because of our material involvement, because of our connection with the physicality of life, it becomes impossible to fully experience the divine, because of how physically invested we are, because of how much we care about the physical world. And so the suffering that a person goes through in this world can help us, can cleanse us from from our excessive connection with Hashem. Or our excessive connection with the physical can prevent our connection with Hashem, and this can be cleansed with suffering. And this helped me to turn this from an issue of punishment, being punished for accidental sins, to think about it differently. And that's as follows. If you think about it, why do people make mistakes? Why do people have accidents?
Lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge, or not paying close enough attention.
Not caring.
Not
Perhaps that's
caring.
stretching it.
Not caring. No. Well, if they cared more, they would pay attention.
And they would also have more knowledge.
And they might have learned what they have to learn. At the same time, when someone is not paying attention to something, it's because they are paying attention to something else, right? We can't care about everything.
How about simple forgetfulness, poor retention?
Poor retention. Well, we remember some things, not others. So
Exactly.
sometimes you could just, so what I want to say is that our accidents are the result of simply the limited nature of a human being. And that goes for every single kind of mistake, even the careless mistake. Because when a person is careless, it's because they have prioritized what they should pay attention to, and they've paid more care to something, and therefore they just didn't have capacity to pay care to something else. Now, you might say that they incorrectly prioritized. You may say that in hindsight, because, well, if you would have paid attention to this, the mistake wouldn't have happened. But you know what? If they would have been paying attention to that, then something might have gone wrong somewhere else, because that's the nature of the human life, is that we have a limited ability to pay attention to things. We have a limited ability to know things. We have a limited ability to remember things. And as a result, things are going to fall through the cracks. Things are going to be forgotten. Things are going to be annoying. A person trips down the stairs because they were listening to music, or because they were thinking about something that's disturbing them, or because they were smelling the flowers, right? So what they did is they prioritized listening to the music or thinking about that thing that's annoying them, and they didn't pay attention to walking down the stairs. Now, again, this is not about what's more important. It's not about what's more important. It's just about the fact that our errors are the result of our limited capacity as human beings. Now, the same is also true about our suffering. Our suffering is also the result of our limited capacity as human beings, and I'll explain. When we talk about something being severe suffering versus a minor inconvenience, what we're really saying is, this is somewhat painful, but I can handle it. I have enough strength, I have enough patience, I have enough endurance, I have enough tolerance to be able to go through this particular issue without it destroying me. And so, relative to how much capacity I have for endurance will be how much this is considered suffering, or on the suffering to inconvenience scale, right? So there's an inconvenience to suffering scale, and that will be parallel with, that'll be proportionate to the endurance tolerance scale, right? However, if I had unlimited tolerance and endurance, then I wouldn't be calling, there wouldn't even be an inconvenience. It would have just been a phenomenon. It would be something that, waves on the beach, simply events occurring to another event. It's objects acting and reacting upon each other, right? So our emotional experience of that is related to our limited nature. And so here we see the connection between accidents and suffering. Accidents are the result of our limited human capacity, and suffering is related to our limited human capacity. Again, for patience, pain tolerance, or whatever it is. And yet, so that's kind of the phenomenological connection between the two. But what is the purpose? Why would, so you could say that simply, so you could look at it and say that we are suffering because we sin accidentally and because we are physical beings. So this is one way of looking at it, right? The same part of us that is physical, it's a symptom of an underlying condition, right? Suffering is a symptom of the same underlying condition that also produces the symptom of accidents. And that is our limited human capacity. So we have an underlying condition. It's called being a material being, being a physical thing. A physical thing is by definition limited. That underlying condition produces two symptoms. One symptom is suffering, and the other symptom is accidents. And so the two are related. Okay, so that's kind of a phenomenological way of looking at it. However, let's take it from a Torah perspective. What is the meaning statement here? What is the teaching? And why is it that we should bring a sin offering? Why should we bring a sin offering from for an accidental sin? The Talmud there continues and says that a sin offering only, he says, I might think that this suffering that a person endures as a result of a sign of God's love, right? We still haven't gone to God's love, right? This suffering which we endure as a result of God's love could even be if you're not aware of it, or if you don't pay attention to it. So he says, no. Just like a sin offering is an intentional act, so too my awareness of the suffering also needs to be intentional in order for it to have that cleansing, God-loving effect. It has to be intentional. So what is the intention that we should be having? So now let's think about what it means to be a human being in a physical form. When we say that humans are physical and therefore limited, is that all there is to being a human being? The answer is no. While on the one hand, we have a physical body which has a limited capacity to accomplish, to tolerate, and to remember. We have a limited capacity to succeed. That is in the physical realm. At the same time, we are also creations of God, endowed with an eternal soul. As a matter of fact, our identity is equally about our divine soul as it is about our physical being. The question is, where do we direct our attention? What do we think is our primary identity? Right? We can either see ourselves as bodies that live by the grace of God, or we could see ourselves as divine beings living in physical form. So which is our main identity focus? And so the question is, how do you know? Okay, so we could talk philosophy from today till tomorrow about what is my prime identity focus. But look at a human being and see can you look at the way a person lives their life and identify whether they see themselves as primarily a body living because God wants us to live, or primarily a spiritual being that is in a physical form. Can you look at the way they live their life? The answer is, of course you can. If a person is spending their life indulging in physical pleasures and prioritizing physical pleasures, then it means that they are primarily a body that feels lucky to live because of God's grace, right? So I'm so happy to be alive, I'm so blessed, and I love pizza. And therefore I'm gonna make sure because I know I have a limited time on earth that I'm going to eat as much pizza as I can, right? That's the person who prioritizes their physical life. Now, from a Torah perspective, that's foolish. It's foolish if you have a limited time on earth. It's foolish to prioritize eating pizza and saying, I'm going to eat as much pizza as I can because I have a limited time on earth. Eat and drink and be merry because tomorrow you may die, right? It's foolish because everything that you're engaging in this world is, all of these physical activities are temporary, not only in their circumstance, but also in their significance. They're inherently limited, temporary, and fleeting in their existential nature. They don't really matter. Meaning, how much does a slice of pizza matter?
How else do
Right?
you have children?
Oh, good. So you want to talk about the nature of physical pleasure, right? We can't be, to broaden what you said, we can't be alive if we don't eat pizza, right? We can't live. If a person stops eating, they won't live for more than a couple of weeks, right? So then all of your spirituality also goes out the window. So the answer is, what serves what?
A balance.
So do I eat because there's something that matters in an eternal way that I'm able to accomplish in this existence, and therefore I eat, or do I seek fulfillment because it allows me to live a more peaceful, comfortable, and sustainable life?
There's an adage that's appropriate, something along the lines of, does one live to eat or does one eat to live?
Right. So living to eat takes my life, it
Unbalanced.
reduces my whole existence to being a physicality machine. So now, there are all kinds of things that can help me to clarify how I should prioritize, meaning to become conscious of the different values, or the difference in value between the physical temporary life and the spiritual eternal life, right? There are all kinds of things that can help me. Now, one of the things that can help me with that is the study of Torah. If I study Torah and I learn about the value of things, and I learn about, what a divine calling is, if I learn about God and I learn about myself as a divine being, so then that can help direct me to a divine purpose type of life, and to correctly prioritize the physical things within my divine sense of meaning. If I don't, so that's one way of doing that. Another way of doing that, another way of bringing clarity to what matters in life, is when a person suffers. Suffering helps me realize how useless my body is. How when a person lives a difficult life, they often realize, sometimes with ladas, with the right intention, with the right focus, they can realize that, all that pizza was really a waste. What would help me right now in this suffering is having meaning, is having a sense of purpose, having a sense of connection to the eternal, knowing that what I'm going through matters. That's what would help me. Pizza wouldn't matter at all right now. And so, in that sense, Yisurim, suffering, can remind me of God's love.
If the pizza's kosher, it might help you.
Suffering can remind me of God's love, because it can help direct my attention to the eternal and transcendent relationship that's possible in this physical life, if I only direct my attention to it instead of to my limited and really vulnerable and the futility of my physical existence, right? So that now we also come back to the korban chatas, to this korban asham, to the sin offering, which is brought in which is brought for an accidental sin, where having sinned by accident is a reminder that I am a limited having sinned by accident can be a reminder that I am a limited physical being that only deserves to live in order to be a servant of God. It can be that if I go ahead and choose to bring a sin offering, to bring a korban asham, to bring that, to go through that meditation of redirecting myself and recommitting myself to my divine purpose, to my godly life. Incidentally, when I mentioned earlier that the sin offering is an intentional act, there are two specific sin offerings that not only are done for accidental sin, but they're done to counteract exactly this physical, this construct that we've described. And that is the korban, the sin offering of the Nazir, and the sin offering of the Mitzora, of the leper, the person who has tsaras. So certainly in the case of the Nazir, of the person who undergoes, who makes a vow, a Nazirite vow, to abstain from wine and to abstain from the normal processes of grooming oneself and to avoid contact with the dead, right? So at the conclusion of that vow, a person has to bring an asham, a sin offering. So without going into how that sin, why that we would call that something needing a sin offering, but just focusing on the nature of that vow, that Nazir is taking undergoing an intentional, has made an intentional decision to reduce their physical pleasure in order to become more divinely connected. And that's the asham, that's the intentional sin offering, which corresponds to the intentional embrace of the pain of the limited human life. The same is also true for the mitzora, for the person who has tsaras. So tsaras is a skin condition which the Torah teaches results from a person speaking negatively about someone else. However, the tzaras require, if a person doesn't pay attention to their tzaras, they're not considered tameh. They're not considered impure. They don't have to undergo the quarantine process.
Wow.
This requires that a person go to the Kohen, they go to the priest, and they say, I noticed this thing on me and I want to improve. And the proof of that is that the Talmud teaches that during the festivals, Kohanim were forbidden from taking tzaras cases because it's just not advised to invite that kind of work of going into the tzaras quarantine and going through the purification process during the festival. It will ruin the festival and the correct observance of the festival. Similarly, a chassan and kala, a bride and a groom, during their 7 days following their wedding, if they see tzaras, are not supposed to go to the Kohen because, again, there too, they have a correct observance of their wedding festivities, which shouldn't be interrupted by the tzaras. And so this indicates to me that tzaras, going through this purification process from tzaras, is an intentional act on the part of the leper, on the part of the Mitzorah, who will go into quarantine and will also limit his or her engagement with normal physical activities, normal human activities, normal human behaviors, in order to bring themselves to a heightened spiritual perfection. So, to summarize what we said so far, if suffering, the physical experience of pain and suffering is a reminder of how limited we are as people. It can be a reminder of how limited we are as people, how limited the things that we place priority on often are in their significance. And when we go through suffering, we can use that opportunity to be reminded of what really matters to us in life, and to remind us that even though our body is failing us, even though human life isn't working out for us right now, but that doesn't mean that there isn't eternal significance to our life, infinite value to continuing to live in this world as a servant of God. So living as a servant of God doesn't require having those kinds of physical conveniences that we normally associate with lack of suffering. No matter what a person is enduring in their life, they can relate to God and serve God and be connected with God, experience God's love. Just as an example, the Talmud says, just as we bless God for the good, so should we bless God for the bad. That is to say, in every experience in our life, we always have the opportunity to say, the creator of the world has put me here and is keeping me here, still wants me on this earth and has a purpose for me. And to pray to find that purpose. And when we undergo spiritual distress because we feel useless spiritually, that can be another kind of suffering. But there again, we have to say, God, I believe that you have a purpose for me. Help me find my purpose. It isn't working out right now. It isn't working out right here. I have confidence in you that you are going to bring me to the purpose that you intend for me. And until I get there, I'm not stressed. I'm not suffering. I know that I'm on the journey. I know that I'm headed towards my purpose. And so that's we have, again, two paradigms. One paradigm is a black and white paradigm in which I'm either experiencing pleasure or pain. I'm either comfortable or uncomfortable. I'm either suffering or I'm at peace, right? That's one paradigm. And that's just stupid. It's like that's living in a mindset in which the things that matters, the only things that matters are circumstances.
You're closing yourself off to new opportunities.
You're placing, you're hinging your identity on things of very little significance at all. I'm making my, think about talking the example of pizza, right? What is pizza?
Fleeting and momentary.
Pizza is dirt that turned into a plant, that turned into a food, that goes into my body, and that returns to the dirt, right? Imagine making that the center of my identity. It's ultimately pathetic. Right?
Widen your focus.
No, right? So how do I know that that's ultimately pathetic? By recognizing the futility of human existence, by seeing the lack of significance, the lack of power that we have. Whereas in the other context, we think about the origin of the universe, the beginning of all things, my source in the divine imagination. God had a concept. God had an idea. And he needed me to participate in making that possible. That happens through the phenomena of pizza sometimes. But that's not what I'm about. And so, in that sense, I matter to God. God loves me. I'm connected with him. And so these moments of suffering, these moments of accidents, these moments in which we become aware of the futility and insignificance of placing primacy on physical phenomena, can help us reorient ourselves and reconnect ourselves with God's love.
I had a minor thought. Perhaps offering up the korban will lead to increasing awareness of one's avera, thus aiding you in transgressing a second time.
Right. So that goes back to the first sort of suffering in which a person, when we said a person suffers, they should examine their deeds and see if they're doing something wrong. Right. That means a person is making bad choices. Right. So if a person is making bad choices, again, that's the lowest level, which we didn't even go to. Like, why are you making bad choices? Because you don't care enough about what matters.
Knowledge, like you said.
Right. So that's goes through that's the progression that we go through. Either you don't care enough, or you don't know enough, or you're simply a limited human being. Right. So
or all three, perhaps.
And all three at the same time. So when a person makes bad choices, that's because of bad priorities. Right. And that's because of a mistaken sense of so sacrificing the animal, giving away something of yourself, giving away some of your money, stressing your body a little bit, not in a way that diminishes your ability to serve God with joy, but in a way that reminds you of who's in charge, who matters, what's guiding what. Is my physicality guiding my purpose, or my purpose guiding my physicality? I also want to just direct our attention very briefly to the dispute between the spies and the good spies and the bad spies. The black spy, it's a black spy, white spy. Remember that?
Yes, Mad Magazine.
Yeah. So
wow, our age is showing.
Page 626, chapter 14, verse 8. so the spies go to explore the land of Israel and come back saying that they can't that we're not going to be able to take the land. Kalev and Yefuna, two of the spies, maintain that we are able to take the land, and they say, verse 8, if God delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it unto us. A land flows with milk and honey. Ach b'Hashem al timrodu, only do not rebel against God. Do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is removed from over them, and God is with us, fear them not. Why do we refer to them rebelling against God? They simply made a determination that they can't. They simply made a determination that they're not going to be able to take the land. And it seems to me that in this context, you might say that don't rebel against God means don't place the preservation of your physical comfort over your divine purpose. To hold on to your limited capacity as your guiding principle, as opposed to your divine calling, is a rebellion against the love of God. And it's to say that I don't see myself as having a divine calling that guides my physical life. I have to live. I'm going to live a physical life, and if I can fit God into that, great. And if not, not. All right. That's
Who says who's rebelling?
verse 9, page 627. So we all have. So I want to. I'm not speaking necessarily about people who suffer.
Thank you.
It isn't about who suffers more and who suffers less. I think the degree of our suffering is going to be the result of the following equation. It's going to be how strong is my body, how strong is how much is my ability to endure, and what is the specific circumstance that's happening right now. But all of that sort of, the pain scale, how great is my pain, is no matter how great the pain is, the underlying condition of being a limited human being is always there. And so, this isn't a contest of who suffers. Like somebody say, "Oh, you don't understand suffering." This isn't a
The
contest.
ladies of the synagogue always make it a contest. I'm so tired of hearing about everyone sick. And you tell them I did this, and they give you one up on them.
Right. So it
One
isn't.
Right.
Let's not make
believe
it a
me,
contest.
Many years ago, I stopped telling them anything physical about me because it's none of their business. Because I don't want to hear that they had it worse.
So again, it's not a contest. It's not about who's suffering more, who's suffering less.
But they all make it a contest.
Because the underlying condition, the limited nature of human life is equal to all of us. All of us are limited beings with a limited lifespan, with a limited ability to endure, etc. And we all of us have to make the choice, how much am I going to identify with, focus on the things that are of the physical and limited column, and how much am I going to focus on and identify with the things that are in the godly, eternal purpose column.